Now, we do need some government. Clearly, the worst places to live are the places that don't have rule of law. The African country where you're afraid to build a factory because your neighbor may just steal what you make. Or the dictator may take your whole factory, so nobody builds anything. So we need government to keep the peace, to give us personal security, to pass some pollution control rules, and then I would argue that's about it. What percent of the economy should government be? Politicians don't ask it that way, but I wish they would, because it's interesting that for most of the history of America, government was less than 5% of GDP when we grew the fastest. What is it now? What should it be? It's now about 40% of GDP. And it keeps growing. The line is going straight up, showing that there's no way they can keep the promises to pay for our health care, Medicare, when we're old. It's trillions of dollars in the hole. And yet they keep piggishly spending more. I'd say they're spending like drunken sailors, but that insults drunken sailors because they're spending their own money. All right, well, that's a compressed journey of my career, and I obviously have come around from liberal to libertarian in my thinking, and that changed my career. I wrote a book called Give Me a Break, and the subtitle the publisher put on was how I went from being the exposing hucksters and crooks to becoming the scourge of the liberal media. And I didn't expect to become a scourge because I was switched from consumer reporting that criticized business to criticizing government, but I was becoming a scourge. I won 19 Emmys bashing business. I haven't won a single one since I changed the focus. My reporting is no longer any good. Somebody came up to me on the street in New York and where I live and said, "Are you John Stossel?" "Yes." "I hope you die soon." So, it is New York, yes. You're glad you don't live there? I'm trying to figure out what's the hatred about. And at first I thought it was because they considered me a conservative. And where I live and work, to be a conservative is like being a child molester. It is the worst thing you can be. And I'm a lousy conservative. I'm a libertarian. I think homosexuality is just fine. I think drugs should be legal for adults. I was not crazy about going into Iraq. I hold a lot of beliefs conservatives abhor. It shows how pathetic it is for real conservatives in the mainstream media. They don't have, if I'm the closest to it, you don't have anybody there. So I'm a libertarian. Why do these people hate me? And I came to think it's because I'm a consumer reporter who's defending business. And they hate business. Business is preached against at the elite universities all over the country. It's been hated in most every newsroom I've been in. And I'm trying to figure out what's that about. And at first people say, well, it's envy. It's because you envy your slightly stupider college roommate who you're a professor now and he's in business and he's making more money than you are. But then I thought about the wealth disparity in old Europe, among the kings and queens compared to the average person. It was a much bigger wealth disparity than we have in America, by far. And yet people didn't hate the kings and queens. They revered them. But they hated the bourgeoisie. They gave them that nasty name. They hated the very people who sold them the stuff that we need to make our lives better. Why is that? And I think that's also instinctive. It's because people think if there's profit and you profit off me, then I've lost something. And I can see why politicians and lawyers think that way, because their world does work that way. In their world, if one person wins, somebody else has to lose. But business doesn't work that way, because business is voluntary. It only happens if both parties agree. That's why you have the weird double thank you moment every time you buy anything. You buy a cup of coffee, you give them the buck, she gives you the coffee, you say, thank you, thank you. Why the double thank you? Because you wanted the coffee more than you wanted the buck. She wanted the buck more than she wanted the coffee. So only two ways to do things in life: voluntary and force. Government is force. Litigation is force. But the rest of life and the best of life and what you protect is the voluntary sector, and that's business. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like Bill Gates takes the pie and takes a huge chunk because he has $40 billion. No, to get the $40 billion, he had to bake 1 million new pies. Business adds wealth all the time, and yet people hate it. Capitalism has lifted more people out of the mud and misery of any system ever, and yet it's vilified in every newsroom I've ever been in. I'm just going to wrap up there because I was told 2:15 you want to get out, but you just did get the cake. So my point is that the founders fought a war for liberty. We are voluntarily rolling over, giving it up bit by bit. And all you hear from the politicians are scare stories about how America is going to hell in a handbasket and we need more government intervention, more protection, just in the area of safety, to protect us from those chemicals on the processed foods, those chemicals with long names. And it's true, in the last 40 years we've been exposed to things that humans had never been exposed to before. Herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, radiation, all those chemicals. But our sense of history is so bad that we don't realize that at the turn of the last century, most people my age had already been dead for 15 years. Lifespans have increased because of increased 30 years because of the very innovation and freedom that we now campaign against. What has made America the envy of the world is economic freedom, and I thank you for fighting for that in America.